Welcome all. So this is Rasool, Faculty of History. So in this session, let us understand what is the significance of history in competitive exams, especially in civil services. When I say civil services, both General Studies Prelims and General Studies Mains. As you know, in history we have three components, that is ancient history, medieval history and modern history. Besides ancient Indian history, medieval Indian history and modern Indian history, we have even art and culture. So in simple we call it history. So here when we have three components, ancient, medieval and modern, and when you go through syllabus, we have a separate tag called art and culture. So how one has to understand from exam point of view, ancient including art and culture, medieval including art and culture, modern, when it comes to modern, including national movement. So these are the strategies, let me tell you. So when it comes to ancient, when you go through previous question papers, maximum questions on art forms. Maximum questions on art forms. Besides art forms, we have socio-economic and cultural aspects. Like how society was, what kind of social institutions which we found in ancient India. Take society in Indus Valley civilization, how the society got transformed to later Vedic period, say so on. Right? So what is the criteria based on which Indus Valley civilization or Indus society got classified, and what was the criteria based on which Vedic society got classified? So social institutions, followed by economic institutions. When it comes to economy, economy stands on three components, that is agriculture, various industries, handicrafts we call them, and trade and commerce. And when it comes to trade and commerce, we have two components, that is internal trade and external trade. So what was the mode of transportation in internal trade? What was the mode of transaction in internal trade? Apply the same towards external trade. With which countries the people had commercial relations? What kind of exports? What kind of imports? Followed by culture. As you know, culture consisted of three components, that is literature, books, followed by religion. Culture consists of three components, literature, religion, finally art and architecture. As I was telling, we have separate component in syllabus, general studies especially mains, art and culture. So culture is a broader term which includes three major components: literary aspects, otherwise called as the growth of literature; religious aspects; art forms; and finally architectural forms. So we shall learn what kind of strategies one has to adopt while understanding art forms, while we understand, that is architectural forms, that will be discussed. Besides, when we take up the second component of history, that is medieval Indian history. In medieval Indian history, we'll be going to discuss Islam, in which circumstances Islam born and brought up, how Islam unified the various tribes in Central Asia, that is we have Arab tribes, the Arabs, followed by Turkish and other tribes. What forced Arabs, Turkish to invade an Indian subcontinent under the tag called Muslim invasions that will be discussed. Especially, so like when it comes to Arab invasions, we have Muhammad of Qasim, Muhammad bin Qasim. When it comes to Turkish invasions, we have Muhammad of Ghazni followed by Muhammad of Ghor. So all these Muslim invasions led to establishment of Islamic Empire. Establishment of Islamic Empire in 1206 and which continued until 1857. The Islamic Empire which was established in the year 1206, what do we call Delhi Sultanate? The Sultanate which was ruled by various dynasties. We have slave dynasty followed by Khilji dynasty, followed by Tughlaq dynasty, followed by Sayyid dynasty and Lodi dynasty. Besides political, the components, we'll be going to discuss the administrative aspects of medieval Indian history. Obviously, with the background of ancient administration. When it comes to administration, Mauryans were the first people to introduce administration in ancient India. What kind of administrative systems introduced by Mauryans, and what kind of changes made by Guptans, what kind of changes further made by the so-called Muslim rulers, and whatever administrative systems introduced by Sultans of Delhi, new administrative units, new administrative systems introduced by Sultans of Delhi, these administrative institutions further improvised by Mughal Sultanate, that is Babur and his successors. It was under the guidance of Akbar. The entire medieval Indian administration got thoroughly changed. And obviously, Akbar made efforts to improvise administration with the help of a dynasty called Sur dynasty, what do we call Sher Shah Sur. So administrative systems are extremely important. When it comes to, besides political history, we have administration. And besides administration, we have one more component we generally come across in the previous questions, including what do we call syllabus, UPSC General Studies, prelims and mains, that is contributions of the respective rulers. When I say contributions, what are the contributions of Muslim rulers to Indian culture? Contributions of Akbar. It was Akbar who contributed a lot to culture. He came up with separate religion, that is Dini Ilahi. He introduced various reforms which are related to secular. And it was Akbar who had soft corner towards all people, especially Hindu subjects. That is the reason we consider him as the greatest ruler in Indian history, not only in Mughal Empire but also entire Indian history. So once we done with one of the important topics of medieval Indian history, that is Mughal Empire, we will be going to discuss Marathas. And you can't imagine the history of Marathas without the role of Shivaji. Before Shivaji, Marathas simply scattered like atoms. They were simply working in different Muslim kingdoms as a petty soldiers. It was Shivaji who brought unity among the Maratha Sardars, and it was Shivaji who established a separate kingdom for Marathas, what Marathas prefer to call, that is Swarajya. Swarajya. Independent Maratha kingdom. And having established an independent Maratha kingdom by Shivaji, and the gentleman also came up with a new administrative pattern, that is Ashta Pradhan system. Being a Hindu ruler, followed various Hindu traditions, whatever traditions which he come across in Dharma Shastras. When it comes to medieval Indian history, we have a lot of architecture. In ancient Indian history, we have architecture, especially the temple architecture, that is Shikhara style we call it. Shikhara style in North India, Vesara style in Deccan, and Dravidian style in South India. So when it comes to temple architecture, we have three different distinctive styles in India we found when it comes to temple architecture. In North India, we have Shikhara style of architecture, a typical style introduced by Guptans, followed by almost all successors of Guptans. We call it Harshavardhana, and including Rajputs. When it comes to Dravidian style of architecture, which was introduced by Pallavans, a regional dynasty in South India, in around 7th century AD. And this particular temple style, which was further popularized by Cholas of Tanjavur. So whatever temples you come across in South India, that is so modern Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, including Telangana state, the maximum temples were built on the lines of Dravidian style of architecture. Then what is Vesara style of architecture? Vesara style is nothing but it's an composite architecture, we call it. When I say composite architecture, the elements of Shikhara style and elements of Dravidian style we found, right? So when it comes to Shikhara style of architecture, North India, Dravidian style of architecture, South India, then how about Vesara style, that is composite architecture, the composite elements which we found in Vesara style, that was in Deccan, right? Modern, few parts of Maharashtra, few parts of Karnataka and Telangana state. Especially we have Badami Chalukyas developed Vesara style of architecture. Further improvised by Rashtrakutas, a local dynasty in Deccan. Further followed by Kalyani Chalukyas, Kakatiyas, including Kakatiyas also followed Vesara elements. Right? So when it comes to art forms in ancient Indian history, as part of ancient Indian history, we will be going to discuss, that is Gandhara art, Mathura art and Amaravati art. Gandhara art forms, Mathura art, sculptures and even Amaravati. Right? In fact, before getting the details of Gandhara, Mathura, Amaravati styles, we will be going to discuss Buddhism. In Buddhism, we have two sects, Hinayana Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. The three art forms which are related to Mahayana Buddhism. When someone asks, what is the fundamental difference between Hinayana Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism? Hinayana sect or Hinayana Buddhism worships the symbols which are associated with Buddha. Whereas Mahayana Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhist sect worships Buddha by making images, idols. So the point is, the so-called idolatry, image worship which are associated with Gandhara, Mathura and Amaravati belong to a sect called Mahayana Buddhism. And it is not to exaggerate to say, in India for the first time, the idolatry concept, the image worship concept introduced by Mahayana Buddhism, little later copied and popularized by Hinduism. Copied and popularized by Hinduism. I need not to tell you, you can't imagine Hinduism without image worship, without idolatry. So when it comes to art forms, we have Gandhara, Mathura and Amaravati. When it comes to architecture, we have we have temple architecture, that is Nagara, Vesara, Nagara style otherwise called as Shikhara style, Vesara and Dravidian style. When it comes to medieval Indian history, as part of architecture, we have a typical style, developed by Muslims, that is Indo-Islamic style. Indo-Islamic style of architecture. Indo-Islamic style of architecture. So under the tag called Indo-Islamic style, the Muslim rulers of Hindustan built both secular monuments and religious monuments. So that will be discussed in class. What are the examples of secular monuments and religious monuments? What are the characteristic features of religious monuments? What are the best examples of secular monuments which are being survived even today? And what kind of material used by, say the builders when it comes to Indo-Islamic style apply the same towards Gandhara, Mathura and Amravati, say Vesara, say Nagara and Dravidian. When it comes to modern Indian history, one of the important components for all competitive exams, especially in UPSC, it has fabulous elements, and for our convenience, the entire syllabus of UPSC General Studies Prelims and Mains divided into 7 chapters. Out of 7 chapters, the first chapter happened to be advent of the Europeans. What factors forced Europeans to concentrate on Indian subcontinent? Why did many European companies enter India? With what motives did they enter? Out of 4 European companies, one European company called English East India Company emerged as supreme, a petty commercial organization from England, English East India Company. Having emerged economically supreme English East India Company, it was English East India Company which conquered for about 60% of Indian subcontinent by using various strategies. English East India Company, a private merchant organization, conquered 60% of Indian subcontinent through wars, Anglo-Mysore wars, Anglo-Maratha wars, through battles, Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar, through subsidiary alliance. The strategy which was associated with Lord Wellesley, through doctrine of lapse, the strategy which was associated with Dalhousie. Doctrine of lapse, Dalhousie, subsidiary alliance, what do we call Wellesley? So my point is, English East India Company, a small private organization, by taking the political disunity among the Indian kingdoms, by using various strategies, could conquer 60% of Indian subcontinent, what we prefer to call these territories as British India. British India, the India which was conquered by English East India Company, administered by English East India Company between 1757 to 1857 and from 1858 to 1947. Between 1757 to 1857 by English East India Company, between 1858 to 1947, Crown, or British Parliament, or British King, British Queen, whatever you call it, right? So having conquered 60% of Indian subcontinent, English East India Company introduced various reforms, administrative reforms, economic reforms. As part of administrative reforms, we will be going to discuss various acts, regulating acts, charter acts, constitutional acts like Minto-Marley reforms, Montague-Chelmsford reforms, 1935 Indian Government Act, and finally 1947 Indian Independence Act. When it comes to economic reforms, we have Zamindari system, Mahalwari system, Raitwari system. Besides, we'll be going to discuss educational reforms, judicial reforms, especially CPC, IPC, CRPC. As you know, CPC stands for Civil Procedure Code, IPC stands for Indian Penal Code, and CRPC stands for Criminal Procedure Code. So once we're done with what do we call the so-called say reforms of English East India Company, so next chapter, that is revolts and movements. So what is these revolts and movements? What was the outcome? What kind of response Indians made to the reforms introduced by English East India Company in 60% conquered territories? Indians did not, the various sections of Indian society did not accept the reforms introduced by English East India Company. Resulted, they did express their dissatisfaction against company. We call it revolts and movements. Tribal revolts. The innocent sections of Indian society, the tribes did express their dissatisfaction. Peasant movements. The peasants under zamindari areas, the peasants under Raitwari areas also expressed their discontent against English East India Company and their agents. Civil rebellions, and finally 1857 revolt. So once we're done with a chapter called revolts and movements, I'll be going to talk about that is socio-religious reformation movements. As far as socio-religious reformation movements are concerned, I'll be going to talk about Hindu reformation movements, Brahma Samaj, Arya Samaj, Ramakrishna movement, Theosophical Society. When it comes to Islamic reformation movements, Deoband movement, Aligarh movement, Tablighi Jamaat movement. Once we're done with Islamic reformation movements, we'll be going to talk about that is Sikh reformation movements, Nirankari movement, Akali movement, and finally Parsi reformation movements. And the last chapter, that is national movement. So as far as national movement is concerned, extremely important chapter. What does it mean by nation? What does it mean by state? What is the difference between nation and state? What does it mean by national movement? What does it mean by freedom movement? Differences between national movement and freedom movement. What does it mean by nationalism? And what was the criteria based on which national movement broadly divided to three categories, that is moderate phase of 1885 to 1905, extremist phase of 1905 to 1920, and Gandhian phase 1920 to 1947. What kind of methodologies used by moderate leaders between 1885 to 1905? And within Indian National Congress, how a group of people became extremists when it comes to ideology, and what kind of movements organized by extremist leaders between 1905 to 1920, that is Vande Mataram movement and Home Rule movement. And finally, Gandhian phase between 1920 to 1947, under the guidance of Mahatma Gandhi, Indian National Congress organized three popular movements, that is non-cooperation movement of 1920-22, civil disobedience movement of 1930-34, and Quit India movement of 1942. Besides the movements organized by Indian National Congress, we'll be going to discuss that is the role of revolutionaries, the youngsters who believed in violence. Through violence, they wanted to liberate their own country. We have many extremists, many revolutionary leaders: Chandrasekhar Azad, Bhagat Singh, Ram Prasad Bismil, Rajguru, Sukhdev, whatnot. We have a group of leaders. So we'll be going to discuss their role. So the entire stuff, the basic stuff, we'll be going to discuss under the tag called Basic NCERT course, which we'll be going to start on the occasion of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's Jayanti, that is April 14th. So while late, please do join us, so we'll conquer UPSC. Thank you.